"Sounds like Jeff's crossed over into the Twilight Zone," said Patrick Lee, the Bandolero's bass player and harmony singer. He stood by the motel room window looking out at the highway. The rain had finally turned to wind-driven snow that encrusted one side of the trees and road signs, swirling crazily through the eerie illumination of the sodium vapor lights in the parking lot. At 2 a.m., only an occasional vehicle inched along the unplowed main road into town. Perrin sat on one of the double beds, while drummer Danny Torrance stretched out on the other bed. Keyboard player Townsend DeKama sat cross-legged on a chair. "What did he say about the fried TV set?" Townsend asked. "Nothing. I think he was just as shocked as I was," Perrin replied. "I ran out. I couldn't deal with it." Danny waved a bottle at Perrin and asked if she wanted a shot of Jack Daniels. She shook her head. She wanted to tell the band how much she loved Jeff and how scared she was, but there was no point to it. Road-weary L.A. musicians were a unique breed of detached cynics. Their attitude could be summed up by the title of a John Cougar Mellencamp album. Nothing matters, and what if it did? Everyone jumped at the intense knock on the door. "Who the hell is that?" Danny snarled. "Probably a groupie who followed you home from the bar," Perrin said and laughed. Townsend answered the door. "Jeff, how the hell did you get out of the—" Jeff brushed past him into the room. There was no cast on his left arm. The bandages were gone from his head, and although his blonde hair was matted, he looked normal. "Jeff, what are you doing out of the—" Perrin was standing, her hands clasped over her mouth. He kissed her on the cheek and said, "The crystal." They were still talking when dawn sliced across the eastern horizon to cast a rosy glow over the snowy white world. Jeff had answered their questions for 3 hours. He focused his newfound knowledge of Atlanta's healing techniques through the crystal, accelerating his healing. Sneaking out of the hospital was easy. Finding help to take off the cast was harder, but he'd done it. "You can't skip out on the bill," Perrin said. "They have my insurance information. Had I stayed, they would have stalled my release, and 10 different doctors would have given me the 3rd degree. It's better this way." "Why did the politician upset you so much?" Townsend wanted to know. "There are 2 social-political factions on Atlantis. The children of the law of one are spiritual and concerned with the greater good. The sons of Belial crave material pleasures and power. Senator Charles Ames is an Atlantean leader named Kezar, a son of Belial responsible for thousands of deaths." "But even if this reincarnation stuff is for real, Jeff, that was then and this is now." I could sense his inner evil. He hasn't changed. The project he endorses will serve only Ames and his associates, and it may have the potential to harm millions. Perrin and the band members glanced swiftly at each other, then turned their attention to Jeff. No one was willing to challenge him. "What the hell did you do on Atlantis?" Patrick asked. "Did everyone have the ability to heal themselves and zap things with crystal rods?" "Third caste priests were specially trained from birth to do these things." "Let's see you blow up the TV set with your rod," Danny snickered. The Jack Daniels was finally catching up with him. "No way," Perrin snapped. "We're going back to my room and then to bed." She stood and took Jeff's arm. He followed obediently. Despite their lack of sleep, they showered together, soaping each other sensuously. Jeff was first into bed, pulling Perrin down on top of him. "This isn't fair," she whispered. "All you have to do is tap into your crystal for an energy recharge." "I'd much rather tap into you for a recharge," he said sexily. Afterwards, Perrin settled cozily into the familiar crook of her lover's arm. "At least you still make love like in the old days, Jeff," she whispered. The last thing she remembered before she fell asleep was hearing him say, "The band can do their gig with the lady singer. I have to stop Kezar." The flight from Sky Harbor Airport in Phoenix to LAX took an hour. Perrin's Ford Probe GT sat on the top floor of the parking lot in the Sunday afternoon sunshine, covered with a film of dehydrated smog and jet fuel. Slipping behind the wheel, she snapped the unlock button and Jeff swung into the passenger seat. It took her longer to find the parking receipt than it did to exit the airport and reach Lincoln Boulevard. 10 minutes later, she pulled into the parking slot behind their Venice apartment. God, it feels good to be home, Jeff shouted, leaping out of the car. He ran the 75 yards down the alley to the beach. Perrin hurried to catch him. In Atlantis, we live on a cliff above the sea, he said, putting his arm around her waist. Lived, Jeff, Perrin corrected. Past tense. We're not there anymore. Maybe all this wasn't an accident, he said, looking up at the cloudless sky. The light breeze smelled sea salty and crisp, rustling the palm trees lining the beach sidewalk. Roller skaters and bicycle riders jockeyed for position along the walkway. Hand in hand, Jeff and Perrin walked out on the sand, skirting a volleyball game and avoiding a panhandler. At the water's edge, they took off their shoes, rolled up their pants, and waded into the surf. Maybe it's all happening for a purpose. He looked deeply into the eyes of the woman he loved. Maybe it's my karma. Maybe we should just be grateful we're still alive and we have each other and we live where we live, Perrin replied. Her warm smile touched his heart. Jeff was sitting in the middle of the living room, dressed in a black t-shirt and jeans, surrounded by photocopies of newspaper stories, magazine articles, and environmental reports, when Perrin arrived home from work Monday evening. All on Senator Charles Ames, I assume. She tossed her purse into a chair and carefully stepped across the papers to kneel and kiss Jeff. Thanks to the L.A. Library, I'm beginning to see what he's up to, he said, waving a piece of paper. Tell me at dinner, she said. She began stripping off clothes as she headed towards the bedroom. 5 minutes later, she emerged in a pink cotton warm-up. Jeff was concentrating on an article. She smiled at his ability to block out the world and totally focus on the project at hand. The living room was southwestern decor, with Taos and Mexican furniture. Special touches included Tabasco mahogany half-paneling and an iron-spotted gold-brick fireplace. Photos, paintings, and Indian weavings were clustered in design groups on the walls. The aroma of cumin-spiced beans wafted through the apartment. Dinner was a Perrin McKinley special, fruit salad, vegetarian chili, and cornbread. They ate on the Mexican tile dining room table, an antique stained glass lamp casting its soft glow over the homey atmosphere. Senator Ames is using the current environmental interest to generate support for a solar laser generator project that offers more potential for destruction than nuclear power, Jeff said. He held a piece of cornbread in one hand, drumming his fingers of his other hand impatiently on the table. They won't discover the full potential until the project is complete. Then, in addition to nuclear reactors and atom bombs, we'll have laser amplification to deal with. It's just as deadly and could be easily developed by unstable third world nations. You can't know that for sure, Perrin said. I know it for sure. On Atlantis, Kezar was the man behind the solar laser generation project meant to triple the power output to the Lacoran plains. Our best scientists warned that a power block could create a surge that would set off a chain reaction. Kezar ignored the advice and overrode the recommendations. He saw to it that those fine men were discredited. What happened? Perrin asked. A catastrophe. A surge started fires in every structure on the plains. Imagine a city of 500,000 people in flames. 200,000 died. Jeff looked away from the dinner table into the living room and the stacks of papers he'd arranged on the floor. Of course, Kezar placed the blame on others and walked away to create new projects for his own benefit. What did I do on Atlantis, Jeff? I'm not saying I accept all this, but you've got me curious. You were an artisan, a sculptor. Even after our children were born, you continued to sculpt at home, showing your work in spiritual shrines. Jeff noticed her dreamy smile. We were considered a vibrationally compatible couple. That means we got along great. We harmonized. We had 2 sons and a daughter. I'm afraid I just can't picture you as a priest, she said. Church and state were one and the same, but the religion contained no fear. Priests were more like the congressmen of today, only there were a lot more of us. Bemused, Perrin shook her head slowly. At lunch, I found a new bookstore and bought some books, she said. She held up a paperback and opened the book to a marked page. Let me read you something and you tell me if it's accurate, okay? Great, Jeff replied, tilting back in his chair. Atlantean society, in its most evolved form, allowed freedom of expression and purpose, and encouraged those belonging to the upper caste to become all they were capable of being. The island continent was populated by people of different races and colors, but the majority of Atlanteans had black hair and a skin color like that of the American Indians. Women were considered equal to men, but during periods when they outnumbered men, polygamy was encouraged and men could lawfully marry 2 wives. Perrin looked up at Jeff and scowled playfully. Then she continued reading. Marriage was supposed to be based on vibrational compatibility, and the ceremony was performed by a temple priest or priestess. If the relationship didn't work, the union was dissolved by the temple authorities without any unpleasantness. Those who did not want to marry were encouraged to have lovers and out-of-wedlock children, if both parents were good mental and physical specimens. A large number of women worked as surrogate mothers in state-run child-rearing centers. Many young people were drafted to serve the greater good of the society in a capacity best suited to their talents. This often meant being assigned to a specific technical school, which left the individual no choice as to his life work. The country was ruled by an emperor and divided into provinces managed by appointed viceroys. The viceroys were responsible for governing their own province and for ensuring the well-being of the people. This included overseeing agricultural development. Harvested crops were distributed equally among the people of the province. Perrin hesitated. Without looking up, she said, "That sounds a bit too socialistic for me." "Please continue reading," Jeff said. At the bottom of the Atlantean caste system were the mutants, or things. They were life-form experiments that had failed, trapping entities in hideous bodies, some half man, half animal, others human, but with gruesome appendages. The mutants labored as slaves, often on farms. Next came the common laborers, production workers and servants. Technical workers, artisans, and researchers stood 1 rung higher, and next to the top of the system were 7 levels of elders and priests. The top of the system was comprised of the viceroys and emperor. The color of the belt each priest wore around his waist indicated his level of awareness. Upper-class women wore tunics, or short or long gowns. Men dressed in tunics, kilts, and sandals. Their clothing was usually white or of a very light pastel. Psychic abilities were highly respected and encouraged, especially among the upper classes. Those who were naturally empathic and developed their gift ranked high in the caste system. Psychic development was taught in the schools, and there was a time when everyone was connected psychically. But when the mind link began to be misused for selfish purposes, the people disconnected. Crystals played an important part in Atlantean life and were used primarily to heal and to project the power of the mind. The Atlanteans beamed light through crystals, transmitting different healing rays to regenerate tissue and organs. Vibrational sound chambers were also used as part of the physical and/or mental healing process. At the age of 10, children studied the subtleties of vibrational sound in their schools. The Atlanteans believed in an all-powerful supreme being symbolized by the sun, or a circle. They considered their god so omnipotent that his name could not be mentioned except as an O sound that was hummed as Om. Perrin stopped reading and put down the book. "Atlantis certainly doesn't sound like any great society to me. prejudicial caste systems, people assigned to their life work. Is this accurate, Jeff? He nodded. Generally, yes. The mutant things were long before my time, and I've never heard of men marrying two women. If accurate, maybe that's something that happened later. But the system worked better than any in known history. Atlantis enjoyed thousands of years of peace and prosperity. Of course, in Odin's time, there is growing dissension between the children of the Law of One and the sons of Belial. I wish you'd forget about this Senator Ames business, Perrin said, beginning to clear the table. I'll be gone for the next couple of days, Jeff replied. I need to do some research. A flyer was printed in black ink on bright green paper. Large letters at the top of the page said, "A demonstration of Atlantean power will take place at 8 p.m. February 22nd. At this time, I will blow up the capstone of the Beverly Hills City Hall with the power of my mind projected through an ordinary quartz crystal. The reason for this demonstration is to direct public attention to an important environmental message I will deliver in front of the Federal Building on Wilshire Boulevard at noon the next day." For God's sake, Jeff, you disappear for 2 whole days, and the moment I step in the door you hand me this? Are you crazy? Perrin put down the flyer and looked directly into his excited eyes. Honey, I have to do something. This will make the public listen. This will put you in jail, Jeff. And what is it that the public will listen to? She countered. What is it that you have to say that the public needs to hear? She took off her sport coat and dropped wearily into a living room chair. Jeff sat across from her. Everything's happening awfully fast, he said, but our country is running headlong into environmental devastation. Senator Charles Ames is doing all he can to speed it along. If I'm dramatic enough, the media will cover it. I'll do it at 8, and that way it will make the 11 o'clock news. People will have to listen on Saturday. Perrin shook her head slowly back and forth. Jeff, damn it, slow down. Your enthusiasm for life is part of what I love about you, but slow down long enough to be logical. If you were a priest on Atlantis, why did you reincarnate as a rock and roll singer-songwriter who can't get a record deal or sell a song? It's not logical. I know you want publicity, but this isn't the way to get it. Perrin, Atlantis made some of the same mistakes we're making today, and they paid a terrible price. I'm not seeking publicity for myself. Aren't you? She challenged him. You've never been concerned about the environment before. Hell, you throw beer cans out the car window. If you won't help me, I'll do it myself, he snapped. Help you? Do you really think I'd help you blow up City Hall? Her tone was exasperated. Jeff, I think you need help. Yeah, he said, standing up. I need your help, and obviously I'm not going to get it. Goodbye. Perrin heard the kitchen door slam and a car motor gun twice before rumbling away down the alley. Jeff purchased the green paper in a stationery store and ran off the flyers for the Friday demonstration on a do-it-yourself copy machine in a quick-print store. They were mailed to all Los Angeles newspapers, radio and television stations, environmental organizations, and every city official Jeff could find listed. He put up extra copies around the UCLA campus. The 1,000 flyers he would pass out on Saturday, he had printed in green ink on white paper. Because they were less subversive, he gave the job to a quick print shop in Santa Monica. Santa Monica was used to radical activists. Sitting in a rented Chevy Beretta parked in the Beverly Hills Library parking lot across the street from City Hall, Jeff fingered the silver rod, rolling it over and over in his hand. He'd spent hours practicing on a deserted cove above Ventura. If he went into a self-imposed altered state of consciousness to enhance his psychic energy, it greatly increased the amount of power he could focus through the crystal. The cliffs above the cove were now pocked with circular holes no one but a few sunbathers would ever notice. Though he tried to keep his mind on the plan, his thoughts kept wandering to Perrin. He missed her. He loved her. And he couldn't blame her for not wanting any part of this. He realized that she couldn't understand his obsessive need to act, a need fueled by terrible memories of another time and another place. If the media thought there was any chance that he would make an attempt on the capstone, they'd be sure to cover it. He guessed a few of the stations would gamble one reporter and a cameraman. The police would be there for sure. So would a lot of UCLA students with nothing better to do than to check it out. Jeff pulled slowly into the Thursday afternoon traffic. BMWs, Mercedes, and Jaguars shot past him, carrying the rich and famous to their dates with destiny. Jeff had to practice some more before he was ready to meet his fate in the Badlands of Beverly Hills. Perrin left work early on Friday. From her apartment, she called everyone who might know of Jeff's whereabouts. No one had heard from him. She watched the local news. There was no mention of any threat to Beverly Hills city property. By 6 p.m., anxiety had become a frenzied fear that corkscrewed through her guts, stealing her breath. The sky was dark by 6:20 as she was driving inland on Wilshire Boulevard. Light rain was misting on the windshield by the time she reached Beverly Hills. As the lighted Civic Center loomed into view, she remembered the ongoing restoration project. Architects had combined Art Deco with Southwestern step designs of green, red, and pink ceramic tile. As an artist, Perrin thought they mixed like oil and water. Only in California, said the critics. Only in Beverly Hills, thought Perrin. She had forgotten that until the restoration project was completed, the Beverly Hills Police Department was located in temporary wooden structures running the full block in front of City Hall. The sight sent goosebumps running up and down her arms. He wouldn't. He couldn't, she thought. Not under the circumstances. But then, knowing Jeff, she was sure he would. Barricades blocked Crescent Drive, and a uniformed policeman turned all traffic left, away from City Hall and back into the business section of the city. She turned right on Rodeo Drive and then east to find a metered parking place on the far side of the park that lined Santa Monica Boulevard. Thousands of young people were milling around in the park. UCLA kids, she thought. They're here to watch Jeff blow up the capstone. Oh, God. Getting out of her car, Perrin shielded her eyes from the misting rain. A block away, a golden arched turret sat on top of a colorful mosaic dome capping the 9-story City Hall. Spotlighted against the black sky, it glistened for everyone to see, challenging Jeff to send it into another dimension, Perrin thought. At the edge of the grass, a homeless man with a bedroll in his lap sat leaning against a sign that read, "The use of this park is prohibited between the hours of 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. Perrin walked through the chattering throng of trendily dressed young men and women to the center of the park, where the hunter and hound statue was located. She thought the statue was appropriate to the current situation. It was 7:05 p.m. She turned slowly around, wondering where Jeff would be. She wanted to talk him out of it. She wanted to take him home and make love to him. She wanted him to forget about Atlantis. The park was a half-block wide and 2 blocks long. The turreted capstone was visible for blocks in any direction. It might be impossible to find Jeff. She started her search at the east end of the park, crisscrossing back and forth through throngs of jabbering people who cast dubious glances at the capstone between sentences. 2-to-1 odds, $25, nothing happens, said a blonde-haired kid with a crew cut. almost in Perrin's ear. "It will be a religious sign," said one conservative-looking girl to another. "It would take a bazooka," said someone else. "Obviously, he's just one of those green earth radicals," said another. After the first block, Perrin recognized the futility of her efforts. She might already have walked right past him. A breeze now whipped the spitty February rain that had soaked through her cotton jacket. She hunched her shoulders, jamming her hands deeper into her pockets to fight the chill. At the public restrooms and phone center, she ducked under the alcove to get out of the rain. She was sure her makeup was running, but she didn't care. It was 7:40 when she finished crisscrossing the second block of the park. 7:50 when she finished checking the Beverly Hills Library parking lot and grounds. As she made her way back across Santa Monica Boulevard to the park, she realized that many policemen had infiltrated the crowd. A TV camera had been set up at the corner, its lens trained on the capstone. A young man in a raincoat held an umbrella to shield the camera from the rain. "Hi," Jeff said. He took her by the arm. "Oh, Jeff, I've been looking everywhere for you. You can't." He interrupted. "I'm parked over there. Come on." They walked down the sidewalk, past the TV camera, across the street, and into an alley between the multi-million-dollar homes on the far side of the park. Jeff unlocked the door of the Chevy Beretta, and Perrin slipped into the passenger seat. He circled behind the car around to the driver's door, drew the glowing crystal rod from his coat pocket, pausing long enough to aim it at the capstone nearly a block away. A shimmering iridescent beam of blue light crackled and hissed from the tip of the crystal. The golden turret exploded without a sound. Glittering metallic pieces showered down upon the roofs and courtyard of the unfinished Civic Center. A roar went up from the crowd in the park. Jeff lowered the rod and nodded in satisfaction. Moving briskly, he opened the car door and eased behind the wheel. The motor rumbled to life, and he drove quietly down the alley into the splendor of the Beverly Hills neighborhood. A slow-motion shot of the capstone exploding ran 4 times on KABC between 8:30 and 11 as a news teaser. It was the main story on the 11 o'clock news. The feature began with a close-up of Jeff's flyer, followed by coverage of UCLA students in the park. The explosion was shown in real time as well as in slow motion. The next shot was of the alley. Witnesses say the beam emanated from this alley. On either side are the homes of the rich and famous. The camera panned the neighborhood. Although no one saw a car, it is assumed that one was used. As you can see, the police are making tire and footprint castings. Perrin and Jeff watched the news in bed, limbs sensuously tangled under sheets still sweaty from making love. "It really happened, didn't it?" Perrin's voice was a whisper of disbelief. The camera cut to a medium close-up, split-screen shot of 2 men. The male news anchor on the left said, "This is Dr. Alan Shelton, a renowned physicist who has agreed to talk to us via satellite. Doctor, how could someone have destroyed the City Hall capstone with a beam of blue light?" Dr. Shelton was a thin, solemn man in his 60s who appeared camera-shy. "Well, apparently it was accomplished with laser technology. In theory, such a thing is possible with a relatively small weapon, but we don't know of any such working model." "Then, Doctor, you don't accept that someone could have destroyed the capstone by projecting the power of his mind through a quartz crystal?" "Absolutely not. Such powers exist only in science fiction." "But if the government has no knowledge of this power, does it mean that a terrible new weapon is now in the hands of radical activists, Doctor?" "I'm not qualified to respond to that question." "Okay, Doctor, what can you tell us about military applications of laser technology?" "Well, lasers harness atoms to store and emit light in a coherent fashion. The electrons in the atoms of a laser medium are energized to an excited state by an energy source, then stimulated to emit that stored energy as a beam. Lasers could destroy hostile ballistic missiles, as in the Star Wars defense system of President Ronald Reagan. Guidance systems for missiles, aircraft, and satellites are in various stages of development. Senator Charles Ames is sponsoring a bill to build the first solar laser amplification generator as an alternative to nuclear. The anchorman interrupted. But you're sure the energy of the human mind couldn't excite the electrons and focus the energy emission? A human mind could never do such a thing. I'd stake my reputation on it. The camera cut back to the female anchor in the studio. According to the flyer that announced tonight's demonstration, the person or group responsible will deliver their environmental message in front of the Federal Building in Westwood at noon tomorrow. I'm sure federal agents and a few policemen will be there to talk to the perpetrators. Channel 7 News will also be there live to cover the story. Perrin was sitting up on her elbow, running her fingers through Jeff's chest hairs. He moaned appreciatively, then said, "During the 2 days I was away, I read the Edgar Cayce book on Atlantis that you bought. Back in the 30s, Cayce described the power of light projected through crystals. He predicted that this Atlantean power source would be rediscovered in the United States in 1958. 2 American physicists filed a laser patent application in 1958. You heard what the newswoman said, Jeff. Federal agents and cops will be there. We're talking about jail time. The wire services, networks, and major news magazines will also be there, Jeff said. We're talking about an unparalleled communications opportunity." One of the flyers Jeff planned to distribute at the Federal Building was sitting on the bedside stand. Perrin picked it up to read again. She'd been hysterical during the drive from Beverly Hills. Jeff had talked to her calmly, explaining and re-explaining. By the time they made love, the dread was receding, but she knew the fears were only swept into the dark corners of her mind. They weren't gone. When the glow of tranquility faded, they would crawl, growling and snarling, back out into the light of reality. The flyer read, "Get involved. Stop Senator Charles Ames' solar laser power amplification project before it destroys us. Nuclear and laser energy generators will eventually destroy our civilization unless we dismantle the existing facilities and stop further development of solar laser power amplification." The text copy read, "My name is Jeff Lafayette. After nearly dying in an automobile accident last week in Prescott, Arizona, I awakened with complete memories of an Atlantis lifetime and with the developed abilities of that incarnation. One example is the projection of my will through a quartz crystal, as demonstrated in Beverly Hills last night. The doctors in Prescott will verify that my body, in 2 days, accomplished weeks of healing. I do not expect you to believe my words initially, but you cannot deny my abilities. I stand before you today for one reason only, to point out that the Ames solar laser generator is as dangerous as a nuclear reactor, and in many ways more dangerous because it can be easily converted to offensive weaponry and duplicated. I am speaking from my Atlantean experience. The project must be stopped, and I call upon peace advocates and environmentalists everywhere to assist me in accomplishing this goal. Thank you for listening." Is it coincidence, Jeff? Ames building a laser-powered generator and you awakening with your Atlantean abilities? Perrin was folding the flyer into a paper airplane. "Alaki and my children died in the fires that swept the Lacoran plains," Jeff said softly. Perrin flicked the paper airplane into the air. It shot across the room towards the dresser, dipping and circling before returning to land on her stomach. "How can I help you tomorrow?" she asked.